Good morning. I'm Gord Long. It's my pleasure to have with me this morning Charles Hugh Smith, well-known and prolific writer on the web, who is the publisher of the website up2minds.com. Welcome back, Charles.
Always a pleasure, Gordon, and I hope you had a great summer.
Well, I have, and I'm still having, and yourself?
Yeah, it's the days are getting longer already though, so and the garden's turning yellow, so it's we're approaching fall.
Turning yellow. I hope that's good.
Yeah.
Okay, Charles, there's been a heck of a summer, and it was tough to figure out what to talk about here this month. But what we agreed to together is you put out some, as usual, some great articles and set on stagnant wages and hidden inflation, and you made a number of really good points in that. And I thought we would just kind of touch on those, and then translate what they're really meaning that we may not have talked about before, or people may not be spotting right now. So can we start off with why wages have stagnated? I got up this one chart here that you used that I thought was quite effective in really showing the difference.
Right. Well, Gordon, we should start by saying that the statistics that we rely on are becoming more and more suspicious, if you will. Like less trustworthy, because and of course you did several great programs, which I encourage everyone to find and watch about the way that statistics are now used for perception management rather than reflecting the real economy. So I mention that now because, of course, relying on to reflect reality, some of them are really suspect, and so we're trying to stick with the ones that are valid. And so we feel like GDP, for instance, is not maybe the greatest measure. It has a lot of flaws, but it's still our bellwethers, and we use that. And we're still relying on the St. Louis Federal Reserve database, FRED, which is the best information we can get. So those are the...
It's pretty, sorry to interrupt, Charles, but it's pretty sad when that's the best information we can get. And it is. And, just on GDP, a big part of consumption now is government handouts and entitlements, which is consumption. So transfer payments and GDP is barely positive, even with all of this recycling into transfer payments. And and we're going to get into inflation, but when you and I look at these numbers, we take out things like substitution, hedonics. They're just endless little games that they play and have continued to put in shadow stacks backs that sort of thing out. But we're going to show charts that show the realities of what people are really seeing.
Right, and to the best of our ability. So when we look at stagnant wages, two things pop out. Number one, GDP has continued to go up for 16 straight years, other than like a couple of quarters in 2008. So the economy is expanding, so we're told. So wages and employment should be expanding as well. And productivity has been rising until recently. It's really fallen off. But over the last, since 2000, productivity's gone up. So we would expect that wages and employment would be rising at about the same rate as productivity and GDP. But what we find out is wages for the bottom 95 are stagnant. The GDP increases and the increases in productivity are not flowing through to the bottom 80%. They actually have lost purchasing power in their wages. The top 5% has done very, very well. And then the sort of middle sector between 81% and 94% have kind of stayed even. But so there's these huge disconnects, if you will. In other words, the economy's supposedly growing and productivity is rising. In the past, we'd see wages rise along with those expansions. Instead, for the last 15 years, we see wages either stagnant or declining, but for the top 5% sort of professional technocrat class.
Well, what's happening on productivity, Charles, it's this chart might be somewhat dated. It has rolled over, and in the United States has been falling quite substantially.
Right.
And even Alan Greenspan, who I would say is part of the originally part of the problem. He's out today saying the issue is lack of savings that's therefore not being placed into productive investments, productive assets that create productivity, and it's only when you get the productivity that you increase the standard of living. And then what's happening is our standard of living is falling. We may have more trinkets, but we're working harder, longer hours for less in real disposable income. And that's right from the former chairman of the. That's I'm not making it up. That's his observations of the fact.
Right, right. That's critical. And so the other chart that you have here from my article was that we can see the 5% has pulled away from the bottom 95% by spending. If we look at this chart, we can see that spending in the bottom 95% has been flat for the last decade, but spending by the top 5% has soared. And so that's another sort of verification, if you will, of this great divide now. The top 5% are skimming a pretty good percentage of the productivity gains, but the bottom 95% is stagnant. And once we include real inflation, then we realize that people in the bottom 95% are losing ground, just as you say, in disposable income and in terms of purchasing power. And so then we get into the discussion of why is inflation officially at 1%, but what we're experiencing is more like 7 to 12%.
Yeah, according to shadow stats, etc., it's not north of 9.5%, and others have it at 12%. Depends on what you want to put in the basket.
Right, and where you are, and so right, and so the link that I posted was a gentleman who did an apples to apples test, and he was interviewed on Peak Prosperity, in which he took a basket of goods, including rent and food and healthcare, for each metropolitan area. And so it depends on which metropolitan area you're in. You're in a high cost, left or right coast, then you're pushing 10%. If you're in a lower cost, southwest environment, maybe it's only 7%. But I think that that's the best and only valid way you can reach an estimate of inflation, is to take a basket of goods and test them in the same metropolitan area over the years, right? So we as consumers, we see lots of evidence that inflation's running a lot hotter than 1%. And so then we're asking, well, why is the official statistic suppressed to 1%? And of course, the answer is the system would break down if that 7% was revealed as reality, because then Social Security recipients would start demanding a 7% cost of living increase instead of 0 or less than 1%, right? And bondholders might not be happy with a less than 0% return if it was recognized that real inflation is 7 to 10%.
And again, the difference is these statistical, I will use the word gimmicks, substitutions, hedonics. There's quite a number that we've talked about before. They make sense on the surface, but what they don't represent the reality that's out there. They don't put it. Everybody that's in a certain level of child care is killing them. It doesn't factor in child care. They're not buying houses. They're under rent, and the rents aren't really reflective of it. They're not putting in the amount of insurances that they have to pay, and what they're paying on insurances, fees, and other kinds of coverage. That's truly eating their disposable income. Education. Generations. We all know educations went through the roof, but how many people today, they've got debts for their kids. Never mind what their kids have got.
Right, exactly. We have a chart here of rents where I show it's up 56%, and healthcare.
The rich that are spending, they're not spending it on rent. No, they're rentiers. Absolutely. They're collecting it. But the bottom 60 percentile, that's what they can't afford to buy, even with cheap interest rates, and the rents are going through the roof relative to their salaries.
Yeah, you have a great chart here about hidden inflation from Dollar Tree and Dollar General, which are the two chains that serve the bottom 80%.
I thought they were really representative. This was just this week. And both of them are talking about how tough business is. And they're saying Yeah, and they're reading the public press. They're saying, I know the economy's really strong. I guess they're looking at the stock market, or they're looking at the public media, but that's not what they're seeing. They're saying, we cater to the bottom 60%. The low income, low end of the middle class. That's where our business is, and they say that it is a serious issue. And I don't know, Charles, if you've been in these stores, they used to be dollar items. Their biggest sellers are bread, eggs, and milk. That's what the basic staples is where people are now going to buy them because they can get them cheaper. Never mind all of the other necessities like toilet paper, etc. That's where they're buying. And around here, I go into these outdoor strip malls that have all been shut down. They're not shut down anymore. They're all full of these kinds of stores, or Ocean State, or all major discounts. You go to the malls, they're empty. You try and get over to those strip malls, it's hard to find a parking spot. But people are wheeling. They're buying their basic necessities. But both of these Dollar Tree and Dollar General, and I got some quotes from both executives. But they're talking about the items that they're hitting: rent, food, health care, taxes. The Dollar Tree is talking about, but Dollar General is talking about the amount of health care that they're getting hit, because before a lot of their people didn't have health care. So you say, well, now they got health care coverage. They're saying they can't afford the deductibles. They're being taxed like it's a penalty. They have to have health care, right? Otherwise, you get hit on your taxes, etc. And Obamacare is, to them, is something just driving right through the roof. Cost. Yeah. So that something gets squeezed, so they got to go somewhere. Or they got to cut somewhere, and that's where they're cutting. But these are basic necessities.
That's right. And real quickly, Gordon, we all know, too, that the package that used to be 16 ounces has shrunk to 14 ounces. And so there's a 15 to 20% less for your money. Rather than raise the price by 15%, they've simply cut the quantity that you're getting by 15%. But the net result is still a loss of 15% of our purchasing power. And we see that everywhere.
Charles, I think a lot of this... I think a lot of our listeners are generally I think they'd all be shaking their head and saying, I agree with you guys. But I think some of the things that they may not appreciate, and I'm certainly really starting to come to appreciate further, is the impact that it's now having on taxes. If people have less income and less money, I mean, they have the ability to pay taxes. And you say, well, low-income people maybe not even paying taxes. It's right across the board. The tax receipts are absolutely falling, both corporate for various reasons and for individuals. And I'll show those in a second. But I have up your chart on small businesses in America. These are where jobs were before, and we've lost so many small businesses, and with them all the jobs that go with them. And years ago, there were so many small businesses that were mom and pops. They were, let's say, a donut shop. They were a hardware store, etc. Well, they've all become chains now. The Walgreens, the CVS's, all the drugstores are chains. All of the donut shops now are Dunkin' Donuts or Tim Hortons up in Canada, or the hardware stores are now Lowe's or Home Depot. So what they've done is they've consolidated dramatically, but put all of these people really out of business and all the employment out of business. So we've lost some 770,000 net losses, small businesses, since 2000. That is crippling to the economy, Charles. And by the way, that's where the bottom 60% out have found jobs. So they can't find jobs, and therefore they can't pay any taxes, or at high enough, the jobs they have don't pay enough to get by. I see signs all over the place here in New England, job employment available, job looking for people. And you say, how could it be a problem? Look at all the jobs. But if you go inside, you'll find they're paying $10 an hour. And you say, they can't, minimum wage. No, what they do is, it's only if you're full-time, 32 hours is classified, do you have to pay minimum wage. If you're down around below 27, they're paying them $10. Matter of fact, I I think it's Home Depot now. They really keep you down to about 25 hours because they don't want to be too close to that number and pay you $10. So all these jobs, you cannot possibly live on them that are available. So the small business is crippling and compounding it. And now,
Right.
as I said, just to lead taxes, I'm showing federal tax here in this particular chart. You can see the ramifications of all of this.
Right. And Gordon, I want to make a point here that, the United States is not alone in suffering from data, statistics that are being gamed, right? Being manipulated to reflect what the official reality is supposed to be. China has had the same problem. And as you recall, and many of our listeners have probably remember, people started looking at the statistics for electricity consumption in China, because that's a more accurate gauge of economic activity than these obviously phony GDP statistics that the Chinese government was issuing. And so then when the Chinese agencies glommed onto this and realized that people were looking at the electricity consumption statistics, which were very bearish and not at all reflecting 7 or 8% GDP growth, well, then they started gaming those and started manipulating those. And so then people turned to Google Earth and they started counting the vehicles in shopping malls and things like that in China, and in the parking stalls for residential developments. And so there's always a way to get a better statistic, but if it has to be outside whatever the official government agencies can manipulate. And so in the United States, the one thing you can't manipulate is the IRS tax statistics. If you're in business, and like we are, it's not worth trying to get in trouble with the IRS by not stating the truth, right? So everybody that reports to the IRS reports the facts, because it's not worth their time and trouble to try to, play gimmicks, unless you're in the black market. Then you don't report anything to the IRS, right? But for those of us that report, these are as accurate as statistics as we can get. And that's what I use. I go to the IRS data when I do my investigations of where the middle class is and where self-employment is, because those numbers can't be gamed like GDP, unemployment, and all the other numbers that we know are rigged. So you've got real numbers here. These are the most factual, trustworthy numbers we can get in the U.S., the IRS tax receipts.
And they represent the real economy. Now, the IRS, at the federal level, this chart here, but at the state level, it's just as bad. It's not quite a mirror image, but it's close enough. And the second chart is where you can see what's happening in the state. Now, I don't have any charts that show it at the local level, the local towns and everything else, but I can tell you this, just the town meetings that I've been at, it's a even bigger problem the lower down at the town levels, because the transfer payments down to them are being cut, but they're responsible for fire, police, teachers, and all the pensions and everything else. Pensions. They still have pensions, okay? And they're still responsible for all of that, and they're getting killed. And Charles, what I see coming, and I've written about this in 2017, is major tax increases. There's no question. Hillary's already mentioning it. Trump's already mentioning it. They know that it has to come at the state level, at the federal level, state level. But I think what people are underestimating in the United States, it's going to be at the local level, and it's going to be on property taxes. Now that everybody has their McMansion, everybody has their yuppie palace, they've financed it at this cheap money. The prices, look in Canada, try and buy a house in Toronto, they're $700 to $1 million, right? Vancouver. Isn't this a right time to drive up the property taxes and the mill rate on those? And it's happening here in the United States already. I talked to Mish up in Chicago. He's beside himself on what's happened with his property. Mish Shedlock of Mish Talk, of what's happened with his property taxes in Illinois to pay for the pensions. He's stunned.
Right. And, Gordon, we should mention that your charts here are year over year. They're sort of a rate of change. In other words, they're not tax receipts per se. They're reflecting our tax receipts growing, expanding, or are they falling? Are they, stagnating? And what these show is the rate of change has gone to zero. In other words, they're no longer expanding. The government's not collecting more taxes.
But the cost of running the government is going up at a significant rate, right?
That's right. That's right.
Cruise missiles are not getting cheaper.
Right. And so, as your charts show here so clearly, every time in the past that tax receipts fell to the zero line, the United States was in recession. So what we're talking about here is a recessionary economy where people are being laid off, their hours are cut, they're suffering either stagnant or declining income, household income, and then their taxes are going to be going up if they owe any taxes at all. And of course, if even low-income people have to pay sales tax. So if you jack up sales tax, everybody pays that, even the people who are just barely getting by. And maybe we should mention junk fees. Now, we've talked about this in the past, but there's another form of taxation which is called junk fees.
Yeah, there's so many fees, licenses, and tolls that you have to pay that's where the tax is coming in, not just on income. I drove just recently back from Buffalo and out through the New York up interstate and the Massachusetts Turnpike. That used to be, I don't know, $4, $6. That was $25. And you say, well, fine, but how many families? That's a lot of money, especially if you're doing a lot of driving on a regular basis. Okay, I was in the other day getting my license renewed. You got to go, and it's all online today to do a license renewal. But you have to show up because they're going to take your picture, and you wait for 2 hours for them to take their picture and zip your Visa card, and away you go. That's all, and then they mail it to you. But I was sitting in there waiting for in 2 hours just to get a picture taken, and there's no way around it if you want to drive a car. And what broke my heart, Charles, the 150 people sitting there for the 2 hours with me, they look like $50 was all they had that week. I mean, because it's all income grades. And they, I know, by the way, how do they afford not to take time off work to be there? But that's the kind of fees, and I can go on with examples of fees and taxation of different forms that is now coming into existence. Even police fines, I haven't had any lately, but the fees for fines have gone through the roof.
Right, and these are extremely regressive taxes. In other words, what you're describing, Gordon, is because for someone earning $1,200 a month, $50 is a lot more money than somebody earning $12,000 a month, right? But they both have to pay the same fee, so these are regressive taxes. They hit the lower income household a lot harder than they do the upper income. But if you look at these charts of yours, you can anticipate that a lot of people are suddenly going to be classified as rich, quote unquote, meaning if you're in the upper middle class and your household income's above 200,000 or something, which seems like a lot of money if you're in, like, say, Arizona or maybe Louisiana, but if you're in New York or California, you're just barely getting by, But you're going to be declared rich, and there's going to be some surcharge on the upper middle class income, and you could argue that that's justified and so on. But I think what we're going to anticipate here is a double whammy. Higher regressive taxes that everybody has to pay in the form of junk fees, and then higher income and sales taxes as well. So it'll be a tax, every type of taxation, from junk fees to property taxes to income tax to sales tax, right? And so there is no other, it's kind of a TINA for the government. There is no alternative, right? They need the revenues. They're going to get it however and whenever they can.
And they're, as we would expect, getting more and more creative as the pressure is on them in bigger ways. Another element that I'm seeing is what I'll refer to as civil forfeitures, where they're actually seizing assets, and then you've got to prove they were wrong to get your assets back, which can last a long period of time. And it's just horror story after horror story. It's getting aggressive. The police departments, this is a revenue source now for in many areas. And I'll give you a personal story, Charles, because rather than being academic here, I had one account that I haven't done anything with for 3 years because it's just parked money, safe, it's invested in treasuries, and it's just sitting there. I haven't touched it, and I hope it's safe. But I got a letter saying to me that if in 30 days they didn't hear from it, they had to turn it over to the state by law. because there'd been no activity in the account. Well, there didn't need to be any activity in the account. It was just it was a yield account. But if I was traveling, or if I was one thing or another, if the letter got lost, that account was seized by the state, and then I had to go back and argue to get it back. You can imagine that'd be a couple of years. So they're gambling on that people will miss something. Something will go wrong. And they've got the assets, and they're using it. And then you may not get it back. But that's the kind of predatory, or sneaky. I couldn't believe it when I saw that. I said, how can this possibly, they do this? And the people that are holding the money in this case were very apologetic. They had no choice. The state would seize it. Scary, Charles? It woke me up, that's for sure.
Right. And so what we're talking about is a vice here that's slowly turning and squeezing the households. We're seeing stagnant incomes, hours cut, hidden inflation that's eating away at our purchasing power at a far greater rate than 1%, the official rate. And then we're anticipating a lot higher taxes across the entire spectrum of fees and taxes, because we can see that government tax revenues are not rising anymore, and they're stagnating too. And the government, as you say, expenses always go up. So how are they going to fund the difference?
Well, this is what I call advanced financial repression. Financial repression's been with us since 2000 and even a little earlier, but it's advancing because as there's more and more government pressures on the government to sustain itself, it has to resort to more and more aggressive stances like this. And I think there's a lot of very good people in all levels of the government that just feel they have no choice. And especially with the amount of underfunded pensions that they have, where they have pension obligations and no money to meet them.
Right. And so you're absolutely right. And I would just ask our listeners to go and study these two tax charts that you've posted here, because that's the story of the real economy, not what you've been told about GDP going up and low inflation. If taxes are declining, that means businesses and households are earning less.
There's no imputation, there's no hedonics, there's no substitutions and all the other gimmicks in these tax numbers. There's the reality right there. And that's what our politicians should be talking about. But anyway, I hope we didn't, or I didn't rather, upset a lot of listeners here with my tirade here today. But it is a major concern, and it's starting to actually anger me a little bit, Charles, as I see this, because I'm seeing real people and the devastation it's doing to real families. I see this at the Cupboards of Kindness, the food kitchens and things that I'm involved with here in New England, and it just breaks my heart to see what they're going through, and nobody seems to care. And it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. So anyway, any closing comments, Charles?
Feel free to visit me at of2minds.com if you want to read my lengthy essays on hidden inflation and wage stagnation and why it's going to continue into the future.
It's better to read Charles's essays than it is my tirades. So tirades rather. So
okay, thank you, Gordon.
Thanks, Charles. Bye.